Hello, everybody. Antifa, can you hear me?
Yeah, I could hear you.
I'm going to refer to you as Antifa tonight. Obviously, you remain anonymous. You prefer to remain anonymous, as most people with Antifa. Obviously, they prefer to wear masks, so on and so forth. And I think anybody in the anti-movement as large as Antifa, be hard to blame them if they have families or anything like that. So the reason you're here tonight and the reason our users are so excited to have you here tonight is because they want to ask you questions about Antifa. They want to know about the real Antifa. They don't want to know about the Antifa that exists on CNN, Fox News, Twitter, Instagram. They want to speak to someone who actually knows about it. Antifa, everyone, is a regional leader of Antifa, and they're here to answer all of your questions. They do not want to be named, but they are from the West area, let's just say that, of the United States. And they have an inside knowledge and are able to answer all of your questions as they come in. Now, Antifa, this is a centrist server. We accept everyone, left, right, middle. It really doesn't matter. We accept Trump supporters. We accept non-Trump supporters. We accept the whole gamut. And that is what we feel makes the best server on Discord. Why? Because we actually get questions that aren't a complete circle jerk for you. Now, number one, we're very appreciative of you coming here. So thank you for that. What I want to do is I want to open it up to you. I'd love for you to kind of give us a background about you. I'd love for you to give us a background about how you got involved in Antifa, where you stand now, where you plan on going, maybe a little bit about what rallies you've been to, and where you see the movement going. So kind of from start to finish. And then after that, we'll go ahead and open it up to our open debate. And Antifa, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I mean, I wasn't really very active in high school with any political. Like I didn't really have any interest in high school with any politics or anything outside of what you just hear every day. I joined the college Democrats when I was at school, and I mean I didn't really disagree with much of the stuff they were saying. I just kind of felt that they didn't really offer many solutions. They just kind of there was a lot of talk and not a lot of solutions. But so I kind of stayed in that group throughout the entirety of college, mostly because that's where a lot of my friends were. When I left college, I kept in contact with most, or not most, but some of my friends from there, because there was a few of us that kind of felt like we were further left from, I guess what you could describe as the average political view there, because the region where we are from, I guess you could say, is not as democratic as other parts of the country. So Democrats there tend to lean further right than Democrats in other parts of the country. So is it still coming in clear?
Yeah, you're crackling a little bit.
Okay. Is this any better right here?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So where do you want me to start from the top again?
No, we can hear you perfectly. I was just giving you the heads up.
Oh, okay, yeah. So where we're from, it's more leaning right. So a lot of our members and members of the Democratic group were further right than I think most of the country would consider. I think that a lot of people would find Democrats from our area almost as like extremely moderate Republicans, or maybe more centrists, if anything. So I describe the organization as it was a Democratic organization, but it definitely would look more like a centrist organization to some. depending on what part of the country you're from. So we always felt that while we agreed with a lot of the ideas that were put forth and a lot of the discussion that went forward, this is me and my group of friends who are further left, that we still just kind of thought that there just wasn't enough talk on action. It was mostly just talk on, there was actually no solutions, I guess is the best way to put it. So after college, a lot of us kept in touch, at least the ones who were closer politically, and I mean, it wasn't like keeping in touch like every day. It was sort of thing where we'd talk, every few weeks about just some politics stuff that was going on, and obviously just life and whatnot. It was kind of a regular thing, the way you keep in touch with friends, that when you leave where you're from, or if they leave where you're from, or whatever. And after a lot of talk, and this was during Obama's presidency, we just kind of were really upset by not only, I guess I would say, inaction from President Obama, but the way that the Republicans and some people talked about him. Like, we just felt there was a lot of racism surrounding the way that his presidency was treated, like things like the whole birther movement and that sort of stuff. We were just disgusted by that, on top of the fact that we were just very upset with the way that we felt President Obama didn't deliver on some of his promises. A lot of us still did support him the second time around, but I would say by then we were definitely a little wary, thinking that, I mean, if you just look at deportation numbers, that he wasn't really delivering on the sort of things he said he was going to deliver on. So for most of the time, it was just a bunch of us communicating. Once around this, I'd say a little bit before the start of the 2016 election, a bunch of us has started getting involved in more, with our personal Twitter accounts, just kind of focusing more on politics and retweeting things and all that sort of stuff. I guess it would be more like activism on social media is what we were focused on at first. And then we started looking at Antifa and all these movements, and we decided that, I mean, since Antifa is a anarchist organization, it's not like there's an official form. It's not like, if you want to join Antifa, send a letter to here and like us on Facebook. It's nothing like that. So we essentially decided that since our area didn't have an Antifa chapter, that we would form one. And through mutual friends and a lot of communication and getting people involved in our community, we were able to get about 30 members. Our meetings pull in the mid 20s. And I mean, obviously, I'm not going to say where we have them, but they pull in the mid 20s, with different people coming in each week. Someone has work or whatever. Everyone's schedule is different. In the 2016 election, we didn't support Hillary Clinton because we just feel like she was a rich elite who built her wealth, and her husband is in this, we would think, is in the same boat, that she built her wealth and her career on the backs of people of color and the working class. So we had our support behind Bernie Sanders, and that's how all of us voted. We focused a lot at that time on mostly online campaigning, and doing some help with the local Democrats. But then once we started realizing that, the local Democrats obviously were not here to help us, we started working with some socialist organizations and getting word out about Bernie Sanders. But obviously that didn't really get us anywhere. And I'm following a lot of the information that was leaked through the Russians or whoever got the information. We were just really upset at the Democratic Party, and since then we've kind of been really, I would say, sort of done with the Democratic Party, and we're hoping that more progressives can get elected. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that all over the country. We do focus a little bit on local politics. I mean, most of our focus is on the national level, but there are some local politics. We have taken part in some small protests outside of government buildings and college campuses, because there is a bill right now that has something to do with criminal justice. So I think we could maybe talk about that later, because that's going to be focusing specifically on our area, where our chapter is from, and we're trying to keep that anonymous until the end. But there is a criminal justice bill in our area that we feel like is going to be targeting people of color, and not even just people of color, but just poor people in general, disproportionately. And they're looking, and we're like protesting against that. But right now we're focusing mostly on getting the word out about DACA and single payer. And I think we're somewhere where we probably do separate from most of the left, and this has mostly to do with our region. We do support the ownership of firearms but we obviously support heavy regulation on that. So like we don't support the bump stock with that the guy had in Las Vegas. So right now we're just focusing on opposing Trump, informing people about DACA and healthcare. We have affiliations with other Antifa chapters and organizations, but Antifa is kind of a divided movement in the sense that I guess there's not like one Antifa group. So there's obviously different groups that communicate. So it's sort of I guess it's disjointed is the best way to describe it. So obviously different groups communicate and they have different tactics that they use. That's all I got on the background.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to open it up to the questions, and we're going to start with Steve Preston's questions. And the first question is Antifa a terrorist organization?
I think if you take a look at the definition of a terrorist organization, we would. I mean, it's obviously I'm assuming we all can read here. I think that Antifa would be defined as a terrorist organization, but I would also point out that the movements against apartheid in Africa would have been called a terrorist, would have been considered a terrorist movement, and Nelson Mandela was considered a terrorist. So I would say that yes, Antifa is definitionally considered a terrorist organization, but we have to consider that Antifa, I guess, is aiming for something that's morally just rather than, terrorist organizations like ISIS or, I mean, just there's plenty of terrorist organizations that just kind of aim to do damage and don't really represent anyone. Whereas we, as Antifa, we feel that we represent the feelings of a lot of the country, but obviously a lot of people, they don't have the ability to act on a lot of stuff they think. They don't feel that they're able.
All right, great. Our next question comes from Republican Stud. Fucking cancer name. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So that question is, and what is, and we've gotten a few of these questions, and I'm not up to date with that. So quite a few people have asked, what is happening specifically on November 4th that we should be aware of?
So my chapter is obviously in communication with other chapters, and our goal is to protest as much as we can and sort of cause as much as a disruption as possible, to the point where public officials and generally people will have to deal with our concerns. We just feel right now that, and just to be clear, no one is, so November 4th, no one is, at least there's no chapters, and our chapter isn't supporting any violence on November 4th at all. But we are attempting to cause as much as a disruption as possible in the hopes that President Trump and the vice president will be forced to resign. And then we figure that there has to be some sort of constitutional way that we can have another election and actually elect a leader rightfully, rather than what he is, which is essentially a foreign plant.
All right, great. This one comes from a server owner, and that is Fonzo. And Fonzo's question is, do you think Antifa ever goes too far during protests?
I mean, I think that obviously a lot of things, like, so protests obviously do get out of hand, I think, pretty quickly. Everyone's emotions are high. I guess I would ask for specific instances, and I would be able to deal with them directly, but I wouldn't make, I guess, a general statement until I saw specific instances. I mean, there's times when I've seen where I thought that they went a little too far. Like there was a time when I saw, I think, a gentleman in a wheelchair who was being assaulted, and that was a little inappropriate. But I would ask for specific instances. I mean, I would say most of the time when there's some sort of violence going on, it's mostly due to some sort of like I guess attack on a member of Antifa. Like very rarely does Antifa actually initiate an attack.
I'm going to urge our users to answer his question He said not only does Antifa never start an attack, but look for specific instances. So please mention those in there if you have them, because um, from what it sounds like, you're veering towards the way that Antifa has never caused any violence. Our next question that we're going to go to is, what is the difference between American Antifa and European?
So, I mean, European
That is from
Antifa just
Bubba. That is from Bubba.
factually.
That is from the user Bubba.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, European Antifa is generally an older organization that has roots in resisting the Nazis in Germany. I would say that the European Antifa is much more in line with, I guess it's kind of like since Europe is further left, they're probably further left of us. I mean, you can find plenty of videos of Antifa in Europe, and I seem to find that they're probably more extreme than we are. I mean, I would say we probably agree on a lot of our politics, and maybe it's just that we haven't gotten to their level of organization yet because they've been around a lot longer. But I would say that they're probably more extreme in action, and that generally just comes from the fact that Europe is much further left than the United States. Like in Europe, in Europe, most of the what you would call conservative, or I guess the right in Europe, is actually socialist, whereas in the United States, it's not like that. So, even their right is socialist. So I would say that they're just probably a little bit more extreme than we are, but we probably both agree on the generally solutions to problems.
All right, great. Thank you. Our next question is from Pope Gregory. If you're called anti-fascist, why is it that you attack conservatives? I feel like you use the name as a blanket with the whole, oh, if you don't support us, you're fascist.
Well, I mean, I would say that at a lot of the events that, so most of the time, Antifa doesn't just, obviously Antifa just doesn't go around and just find people and assault them or whatever. Obviously, we don't condone just random assaults in the street, but there's plenty of times when conservatives look for events with their only goal being to spread hate or to spread bigotry, and we just won't stand for that. Now there are, I just think that a lot of conservatives don't, I guess they don't understand that. They don't understand that the stuff that they're doing, all they're doing is spreading hate. So essentially, I guess if you're a conservative who's not spreading hate, we don't have an issue with you, but most conservatives are spreading hate. I mean, that it's a sort of, if you've ever watched, I mean, we've listened to Ben Shapiro talking campuses and stuff like that, and just some of the stuff that he says about LGBT and trans people is just disgusting.
I have to say, as you know, I rebuttal.
Yeah.
Using Ben Shapiro as your reasoning and his hate for LGBTQ, do you think that is you jumping to an area that kind of fuels your ability to look right or correct, because essentially you're jumping on the movement of someone that really doesn't speak for the whole conservative party? Because I think what you're forgetting essentially is the people that go to work every day, the people that are normal conservatives that have nothing against gay people, and they just want to make America a better country. Do you feel jumping on his bandwagon as your point is a little unfair?
Well, I mean, I think it's obvious that Ben Shapiro doesn't necessarily represent all of Republicans. Like, I'm sure in states that are further left, there's Republicans that or people I guess we consider conservatives that don't necessarily seem like all that conservative to places like where we are. That's very conservative. So I guess we wouldn't lump him in with them, but just the idea of people going to his events and that sort of thing, like those people are the people we have a problem with.
Okay.
They're going to his events, and they're sort of, and he gets paid to be there. It's not like he's going there of his own tuition. He's just showing up. He's getting paid to spew hate on these campuses. So we actively try to resist him.
So how do you feel about actively trying to stop the minority of the conservative party?
What do you mean?
As in those people that go to those showings are
Go to those events.
they're the minority. They're not the people. They're not the majority of conservatives, right? So the majority of
Right.
conservatives are white males that hold a normal job, pay taxes, show up. They're not racist, but they believe in free market and some other items. How do you feel creating an organization that essentially focuses on the minority and extreme standpoint?
Well, I mean, we think that Ben Shapiro's opinions and stuff aren't necessarily extreme to the Republican Party or to conservatives. We think that he's so I think the thing about him is he's just more honest about himself. Like I think that he's like, as much as we don't like him, he's very honest about his opinions. And we think that a lot of members and a lot of conservatives probably do agree with him on a lot of things. They're just not honest about it because when they actually say these things, they realize how bad they are.
They're like closet racists.
Yeah, I guess that would be a good way to frame them.
I mean, essentially, the guy in the white picket fence in the suburb that isn't going to say the N word because he'll get fired, or say you're a fag or whatever because they'll get fired. But secretly, behind closed doors, they do somewhat maybe say it occasionally here and there. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that closet racist is probably a good way to.
It's a good answer, man. I agree. So next question comes from Kirby Games. Do you believe Antifa has truly accomplished anything? And if so, what is it?
I mean, I think you can see from not us, but the organization in general, being able to block people like Milo Yiannopoulos and whatever her name is from speaking at Berkeley, and then other speakers being blocked on other campuses. That at least at the colleges where we think that controlling the discourse there is really important, I think that we've been able to control the discourse. We are worried about the Trump administration sort of using free speech to promote hate speech on campuses, and we think that is going to do some damage. But we think that just getting the word out about the sort of things that are being said by people like Milo Yiannopoulos, Ben Shapiro, all these people is good, and really shining a light on them and stopping these events from happening is just sort of. I think it's doing. I would say that that's probably our most successful area. Obviously, there's things that are out of our control. Like we would like Bernie Sanders to be in the White House, but the Democratic Party kind of screwed us on that one. So there's not a lot we could have done about that. We did all we could. But I would say the college campuses is probably our greatest success.
Great answer. The next question comes from Ahmad NSA. And the question is, Antifa is made up of a wide amount of leftist groups. Which group do you personally identify the most with? Communists, socialists, anarchists, etc., and why?
I would probably say we're sitting between the communists and the socialists. We think that socialism and communism go hand in hand, and that communism has never really been tried properly. It's like the Soviet Union is not a good example of communism. Cuba is not a good example of communism, because we think that the leaders of those countries were not necessarily communists. That like people like Joseph Stalin were really just people looking for power, not looking to help anyone. So I guess in that sense, yeah, we're probably more. I'd say we're closer to communists. Yeah.
All right, great. So you essentially identify with communists.
Yeah, but we don't have a problem with socialists.
Fair enough. The next question is from Jules, and the question is, Do you believe that Antifa and the Black Lives Matter are both negating the beliefs of the political left? Both groups are known for violence.
Um, I guess I understand what the statement or like what they mean because I would say that the left does have a problem where we have a lot of older Democrats who, much like the people who I met in college, were sort of only interested in talk and not action. But I think that with the election of Trump and the Republicans sort of moving the country or trying to move the country further and further right, that there will be a sort of awakening in 2020, or hopefully sooner. Obviously, sooner is the goal. But if it has to go till 2020, I think that there will be a massive win with the electorate, and hopefully we can get probably not Bernie Sanders because he will be older, but hopefully he can find a sort of successor uh, that can get into place, and we can vote for them, and we can get some stuff at the state level. So I think that I understand the idea that we negate the left because there are obviously parts of the left that have been here longer, um, that don't necessarily agree with us. But I get what I would point out is that if someone like Bernie Sanders had gone to the general election, we're pretty sure he would have beaten out Trump because a lot of the voters that that Donald Trump got, so sort of the Rust Belt and the middle of the country, which were essentially industry, people who had lost their jobs from industry and who had been told by Democrats like Hillary Clinton for years, "We'll fix your problems." I mean, Obama did the same thing to them. They sort of felt screwed, so they voted for Trump. Um, Now, I think that there's a big racial component to that. That a lot of these people were white men voting for him, but I think that there's also a bigger economic component to that. So I think I think we can exploit the economic component, and that'll bring people over to the left and get people voting for left-wing politicians.
Great answer. So the next question comes from another user, and their question is, what is your opinion about the Israel-Palestine problem, and what are your thoughts on solving it, and is there the ability to solve it?
Well, I mean, our goal is obviously that we think that there should be a diplomatic solution to the problems in Israel, but we think that Israel is acting in very much like a terrorist organization, the way that they treat pretty much all the Muslims nearby. Now, it's obvious that Muslims in the region don't like them there, but we think that Israel is doing things to sort of I'm trying to think of a word, like kind of they're sort of almost creating that problem themselves. So we think that the country should be separated and that there is a two-state solution. But Israel is going to have to back off some of its settlements, and they're going to have to stop trying to expand. Because Israel, with the funding of the United States and the full support of the UN and all that, is sort of just constantly expanding. We think that the UN does make statements out against Israel, but we doubt that the UN really means the statements. And with Trump in power and the new UN ambassador Nikki Haley, we think that it's only going to get worse. It seems pretty clear that unlike the Bush administration and the Obama administration, they're taking a much stronger pro-Israel stance. So we think that as long as Trump's in power, it's going to get worse, not better.
All right, good answer. Moving on to the next question, and the next question is going to come from Hyun7. Who do you think would be an ideal candidate to run in 2020? Great question, by the way.
So obviously we would like Bernie Sanders, but we just think that he's getting a little too old. If there was no one else to run with those sort of views, we would say that we would just have to we probably would have to vote for him and hope that in doing that he could kind of, obviously with the presidency you can support a lot of the lower level elections. So obviously Trump is working right now to work on the lower level elections. We think if you get Bernie Sanders in power, he can actually affect the lower level elections. But ideally, it would be someone with Bernie Sanders' view who's maybe a little younger and a little bit more charismatic, I guess is the way to put it. So essentially, if we could get an Obama who wasn't a liar, that would be our goal. So if we could get an Obama who actually did what they said they would do and didn't deport a bunch of people, that would be our ideal candidate. So we don't necessarily have someone in mind. I know I've seen a lot of people float Elizabeth Warren, but we don't. We think that she's probably just another lying Democrat, and we're not necessarily.
Yeah, I'd rather
we're a
fucking
little wary of
I'd
her.
rather fucking die than see her on the ticket. No, honestly.
Yeah.
I'd rather take a fucking bullet. She's cancer. Bernie's cancer. Bernie might have cancer. He's so fucking old. All right. Moving on to the next question. It's actually a follow-up to a previous users that I wanted to get in there because they're following up, and I like to do that. This was Jules. She said, what I meant in my does Antifa and Black Lives Matter negate their views of the left question was that the left constantly preaches acceptance, open-mindedness, and inclusion. How does political violence against people who don't align with your beliefs in any way tie to inclusion and acceptance?
I mean, I like, so now hearing that, I guess I definitely understand now the point of the question, because I have been asked this question by a few people a lot, because I think it is a pretty important question to Antifa. So essentially, the people that we're fighting against, the people that our that chapters commit violence against, are on their own committing violence. So sort of by going up and supporting people like Ben Shapiro, who spread hate speech and who spread hatred, so the words that they spread lead to action. They lead to people like people getting assaulted. So we think that violently resisting them is the only way that we can stop them, because they're already violent. I guess like it's sort of thing where we're only reacting to their violence, so we're just reactionary. We're not starting it. And with the idea of inclusiveness, inclusiveness is good, but the problem is that you can't include people who don't want inclusiveness. So we think that these people that we're fighting against aren't interested in inclusiveness. They're only interested in driving people apart.
All right. Thank you. Our next question comes from a political elite, which is the highest tier of member we have on politics, and it is from Razin. And the question is, what do you think of third positionist economic proposals such as corporatism, national syndicalism, proposed by fascists, national socialists, and integralists, etc.?
So I'm not sure what exactly that stuff is, I guess. So I can't really make a comment on that because I don't know.
Do you want to elaborate on that question?
Yeah, if we get an elaboration, I'd be happy to answer it.
Razin's typing right now. He'll elaborate for us.
Okay. Is that in the AMA text?
Yeah, and I'll read it to you here. He'll answer. See what he says here. It's a good question because the Nat Sox, I mean, you got the fascists, and I think we're probably more wondering what exactly you mean by the third position is economic proposal. Just fascist economics in general. What do you think of fascist economics since they reject both capitalism and communism?
I mean, I guess I'm just like not sure what exactly they mean by like
What?
so when you're talking about a fascist economics.
So I'll break it down for you. So he's essentially saying fascist economics, okay? They reject capitalism, right?
Yeah.
They reject what America believes in, and they reject what communism believes in. So what is your thought on that?
Well, my thought on it, I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a picture of what a system like that looks like. So obviously the economic systems that we support would lean towards communism and socialism. So do they lie more in the middle?
Would you consider Nazis fascist?
Yeah.
You would.
Yeah.
Would you consider communist left?
Yeah.
Would you consider Hitler's welfare program that is essentially maybe even broad when he first started broader than America's left then?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think with Nazis, there's definitely a leftist component to them, with which would be, I mean, they were the National Socialists. That was the name of their organization.
Right.
Um, but with Nazism, you can't unmarry with that the extreme levels of racism and nationalism and sort of almost a focus on building an empire. That can't be unmarried from Nazism. So I think that Nazism has components of socialism, but
So essentially
very
you
specific.
supported Hitler and Antifa would have supported Hitler until he became a nutcase.
Probably not. I mean, Mein Kampf, which was
I
written when
mean,
Hitler
one
was
would
in
argue
prison.
he was more of a communist and a socialist than anything until he lost his.
I think you could argue that. I think someone could go down that line of argument, but like I said, I think that Nazism is ideology. You can't unmarry Nazism's focus on extreme nationalism and racism, because that was sort of I would say, the biggest component of Nazism. I mean, obviously socialism was part of it, but I think that you can't unmarry the two.
That's a good answer. Um, Next question comes from Infidel. And the question is: an article on the Antifa website called for the abolishment of the Baltimore police. While it was an anonymous author, it's published on the Antifa website. Is this the position of Antifa? And if so, to what extent does Antifa believe the professional police forces should be abolished? City metro, county sheriff, federal law enforcement, is there a certain level where you don't think they should be, or do you think they should all be abolished?
Well, we think that so at least obviously my chapter had nothing to do with that article, and we don't necessarily know specifically what reasons were behind asking for that, because we didn't read that article, so I'm not really sure exactly what the reasons were behind banning or abolishing the police. Uh, so we don't necessarily support a complete removal of the criminal justice system or the police, but we think that the police need to face much more serious penalties. Like, police can't get away with killing people just because they're police officers, especially not people of color, which they regularly get away with killing. The police shouldn't be able to get away with breaking the law just because they're police. So, like, obviously, if you have someone in the family who's police, you can get away with speeding and stuff like that. That shouldn't be happening. But we don't. So that there's no situation. So we don't think we're at that point yet where the police need to be abolished. But it's definitely not unforeseeable that the police would start overstepping their bounds more to the point where they would need to be abolished.
All right. So I'm going to ask you a question that comes up in our server. We've asked in quite a few debates. You're obviously familiar with Charlottesville, correct?
Yeah.
So you obviously know an alt-righter ran a car into people, correct?
Yeah.
The mainstream media pushed that down people's throats and they ate it up. Now, the question that we ask our users during debates are spicy, difficult, intricate questions. And I honestly believe we have some, I mean, based on these questions, you can obviously tell we have some very intelligent people here.
Right.
So my question to you that we ask them is, if it was an Antifa that ran that car into someone, do you think that the media or President Trump would have responded differently?
I mean, of course. I mean, we think that Trump tried to glaze over it because it was someone on the right. So I think that at least my chapter probably parts with much of the left in the fact that we do actually respect that President Trump is he's a decent political player and a decent in the sense that, like, he's skilled at it and he's a decent public speaker. and we don't think that he's stupid. We don't think that someone who has their name in gold across a building in Midtown Manhattan is stupid.
I'm not going to cut you off here, but I'm going to. And I want you
Yeah.
guys to hear and I want you to continue after this, but I really want everyone here to hear what he just said about the fact that his respect for Donald Trump and his respect that he's got a name across a gigantic building. Nobody in Antifa thinks Donald Trump is a complete idiot. Nobody.
Right. And
And,
we
and I
think that,
and I think sometimes that's misinterpreted. Am I right? Like I think sometimes
yeah.
that everybody
Well, I mean,
thinks he's like completely like got an IQ of 10.
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of that thought is not unfounded because I think part of the reason why Trump won is because there was a lot of underestimation. So we think that part of what we need to do is we can't be underestimating the right. So obviously people like Ben Shapiro are disgusting and they say disgusting things, but he's not stupid. Trump is not stupid. So the way that he treated Charlottesville was very clearly a thought out political response, and I mean he used it to the fullest. I mean I think he caught a lot of flack for it, but he's still president, so obviously he didn't catch enough flack.
That's a good answer. But my biggest thing is I think that everybody thinks that Antifa just absolutely hates Donald Trump, and I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I think that Antifa, and similar with other sides, there's a bigger picture to it all, right?
Well, I think that a lot of us obviously hate Trump and his policies, but what I would say is that there is a lot of us who do respect the fact that respect the fact in the sense that we identify the fact that he is a talented political actor. And to treat him like he isn't is a mistake, and it's sort of a recipe for disaster. It's sort of what the Clinton campaign did. They sort of treated Trump like they acted like she was going to be elected or like it was going to be a coronation ceremony.
So what
like that.
What about Donald Trump bothers Antifa the most? Would you say you obviously run a chapter? You're in contact with some of the other larger chapters, and across the U.S., wherever. What bothers Antifa the most about Donald Trump?
So we think that. So first of all, it's pretty obvious that he's trying to roll back anything good that Obama did, because there was very little that Obama did that was good. Obviously, a move toward government health care is one of them. So he's attempting to roll that back and has essentially said that whatever Republicans do, they could put a crack bill on his table and he'll sign it.
I got to rebuttal you. I hate to cut you off, but can you explain to our users exactly? You mentioned government health care. He wants to end that, so on and so forth. Can you explain to us why it makes sense for Antifa to say Americans getting a 70, 80, 90% increase in healthcare costs is a good thing? I mean,
well, we just think that it leads to the general good. So having everyone on healthcare will lead to the general good. I mean, right now there's plenty of people who can't get healthcare.
Run out of money.
I mean, I think that the U.S. is in theory already run out of money due to the debt, so I don't think anyone's ever going to really. I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think
with healthcare being one of our biggest costs, is Antifa looking at Donald Trump being against healthcare? The main reason he's against healthcare is because he is not on board with Americans seeing increases, especially sick Americans who Obama claimed he was going to back up. Do you feel that it's a little unfair to attack him to try to defend the people who this was originally created for from not getting 90% increases in healthcare costs?
Well, we think that his approach is to essentially say that it costs too much and we can't do it. But in the same breath, he's willing to provide more funding to the military. So we think that cuts can be made in other places to help these sick people. It's just that Republicans are not willing to make those cuts. I mean, it's why do we have bases all over the world when we have people sick who can't even get health care? It's sort of like that would be, I guess, our rebuttal to that.
Good answer. All right, great. Thank you for that. We're going to move on to the next question, and the next question is going to be from Bubba. Do you encourage your followers to wear body armor so they are less likely to be injured? What is your opinion on shields and weapons?
So my chapter has not had a problem with violence. If now we do wear masks, but if we did see a rise in violence against my chapter, I would promote wearing body armor and all that sort of thing. I mean, obviously, like I said, where I'm from, we're a little bit more right, and we do support gun rights. So a lot of us do have that sort of equipment. Just from growing up around guns and that sort of thing, you accumulate a lot of stuff. So I would say if we saw an escalation in violence directed towards us, yes. But at the moment, I'm not. We don't support any sort of. Or I mean, obviously, I think there's probably are places where it should happen. Like I would say that some of the people at Berkeley probably and in Charlottesville would have been well off wearing some sort of body armor. But no, with my chapter, I would say no.
Thank you. The next question comes from. Hold on. Sorry. I'm going to get the username because I like to mention the usernames. Hutu supremacist. And the question is, which communist thinker does Antifa in general take inspiration most from?
So all of our members are required to do some reading from the Communist Manifesto. So we do sort of draw a lot of inspiration directly from Karl Marx and Frederick Engels' work. We think that focusing specifically on their work and their writings in there is probably it's sort of like the best way to focus because it's the most pure that you can get that idea. So if you sort of start reading and studying people later, you see a lot. They sort of start to muddy the waters a little bit and water down the message. Now, that's not to say that there aren't activists out there right now who are doing good work. Like Bernie Sanders is a good example of a politician and an activist who's out there doing good work. But we like to focus a lot more on the original source, which would be the Communist Manifesto for socialism and that sort of thing. And we do also support reading the other side just so you can understand their arguments. So like we think a good place to read the other side would be The Wealth of Nations by who's that by? It's by what's his name? Adam Smith. So that would be sort of I wouldn't say it's the direct counterpoint to the Communist Manifesto because the Communist Manifesto was written later. But if you want to get an idea of sort of capitalism to a certain extent, I would say The Wealth of Nations is a good place to read. So we like our members to read both, just so we can understand the other side. Because if you understand them, then you can sort of criticize them and attack them where they're wrong and where their weaknesses are.
All right. I sent a little message to users because I'd like to kind of hit on some current events. And one that a user sent in prior was, what is Antifa's take on the NFL kneeling during the national anthem and why?
So we think that we think that since there's nothing in their contracts that say that they can't do that they should be able to do it without being fired. We think that the president commenting about it directly is, absurd. Obviously, you think he would be worrying about other things like Puerto Rico or Texas or Florida, rather than some players in a sports game kneeling. And we think that a lot of it's being mischaracterized. So obviously, I think it would be a little ridiculous for anyone to suppose that all this kneeling has been good for the league as a business, because it's pretty clear that the league has lost a lot of viewers, and I'm sure sponsors are pulling. But we think that that's only because it's being mischaracterized as a protest against the flag, rather than a protest against the sort of oppression that the players' families see. Obviously, a lot of these people's families are people of color, and a lot of their families probably do see a lot of problems in their communities. They don't really get the sort of help that white communities would get. So I guess our opinion is we're in support of it, and we think that it's being mischaracterized by the right. And it's being mischaracterized not just because the right stumbled upon, not just out of like luck. Obviously, it's because the right understands that they can mischaracterize this and they can win political points by doing it.
All right. To rebuttal, Donald Trump, unless you expect him to go build houses in Puerto Rico with nails and a hammer, which I guess you could say he should do that, but no president ever, period, ever that's ever existed, ever, or probably will, has ever done something like that. Is how the presidency works is generally you're informed on what's going on in certain countries, and generally you make an executive decision, obviously given the name of the presidency and chief executive. So my question is, you say that Donald Trump should be focusing on Puerto Rico, but the real question is, he's going to get information on Puerto Rico. So if Antifa wants to stick by the fact that he should get nails out and boards and 2x4s and start building houses for some fucking people none of us have ever met, then fair enough. But the real question is, do you really think not mentioning the NFL, which is the most watched in America sport, is not an actual thing that the president of the United States should actually bring up? And before you answer, number one, why shouldn't they bring it up? And number two, why does every president speak before the Super Bowl if it's such an insignificant point?
I mean, I think the reason why a lot of presidents speak before it is because they understand it's so it does wield with it political power. So obviously, speaking before sporting events, throwing out the first pitch at a baseball game, doing this sort of thing is just sort of good for polls in general. And we think that he's doing this flag thing because he understands that there's sort of no losing for him. So the way that he acted is completely inappropriate for a president to act, and we think that it's taking up a lot of time to detract from some other things that are going on in the country. Like there's a lot of changes. Like so today obviously was the last day for people to reapply for DACA. And there's so much going on in the news now that I don't think that a lot of people are really informed about that.
Good point.
So we think that he's just sort of trying to create smoke in general, just to block some of his bad decisions. And in the sense of like, what more could he do? Obviously, we spend all this money on the military, yet there's only a few thousand troops down in Puerto Rico. Why can't more be sent there? Because his criticism seems to be that it's not his fault that he's sending supplies to them and they can't distribute it. That seems to be his criticism, which I would say fair enough. You're the president. Use the military to do that. You have an entire military. Use them to distribute the goods if the local officials can't. And then his traveling there doesn't seem to help much either. I mean, he was throwing paper towels out like it was some sort of like sick game, and it was like he was just throwing like it was a rally or something. It was just absurd, and just his behavior in general and the jokes he was making were completely unacceptable.
Just rebuttal that President Trump, number one, doesn't set up how the tables are set up and how the goods are handed out. I mean, he's the president of the United States. He's not making calls to talk about where the paper towels are going to be and where the apples are going to be and where the bananas are going to be. And in fact, those were set up before he got there on those tables. And he started throwing them into the air like that because he was like, what is like, we're sitting here and all these people are staring at us. And he started to throw them in because he was sick of talking, in his defense. Okay. Because we like to keep it real. But that was a great answer. I think that you're right. Sometimes I think bringing up the NFL is an important point because there's more now people that watch NFL on TV than go to church. on Sundays if you add them all up. So I think bringing it up is good, and I think Trump has a right to do that if his country surrounds around that. But what I don't think is right, which is what you mentioned, is to use that as a point to maybe pass over DACA or something like that. So great answer. The next question comes from Nerf My Thumbs. And how do you feel about the comparison that has been made between Antifa and the Patriots during the American Revolution? Do you feel you deserve that comparison, or is it over exaggerated?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the patriots of the American Revolution they would be considered terrorists. I mean, that's how you would define them. You know, they were practicing war against the country that they were officially part of. Now, I wouldn't say that we are practicing war against the United States. I'd say we definitely aren't doing that, but we are sort of fighting for this idea that we can be free from all of the racism, the bigotry that Trump and his cronies have brought into the country. Maybe not brought into the country, but sort of exacerbated in the country. So we're sort of fighting for freedom from that. And so I guess in some way we compare, but it's sort of like one of those things where there's similarities and differences. I mean, that's obviously a pointless statement, but I would say in some ways yes, in some ways no.
I think you're right. Kind of a rebuttal question. Do you think, do you feel the CIA or FBI has followed you? And what are the chances you think when they find out you're in a channel like this, they actually entered it? Or do you think that doesn't exist?
Oh, I mean, we're pretty positive that the FBI, the CIA, generally speaking, intelligence organizations from within the United States and outside of the United States are focusing on Antifa. So we see a lot of mass flagging on Twitter and Facebook, which can be right-wing bots focusing on us, but then we also do see times when there has been infiltration.
I would love for you to explain mass flagging to our users.
So essentially what happens is you'll get somebody like, let's say Mike Cernovich, right? Let's say Mike Cernovich sees an account that he doesn't like an Antifa account. He'll sort of rally everyone around and have everyone report that account. Now, generally speaking, of course, Twitter, Facebook, all these places like to pretend that they review banned stuff or they review reports. They get so many reports, they don't review them. It's just bots. They just ban. And when an organization like Antifa, so the only part where there's actually a human element is usually when you apply for an unban, and in those situations, we have seen accounts be reinstated, but it's sort of is rare because
probably.
Yeah, pretty much. So essentially, they're mass flagging to get us auto banned by a bot, and then we have to go through the painstaking work of trying to get unbanned, which usually doesn't lead to any success. I mean, we have had people unbanned, so I'm not going to be.
Which is ironic because Twitter hasn't banned Donald Trump. What is your take on that?
I mean, it's obviously a business decision. That's all it is. I think he should be banned, and I think that a lot of people on Twitter would agree. Look at the fact that they banned people like Milo Yiannopoulos, Sargon of Akkad. They've banned plenty of people on the right, and I think that it's pretty obvious that Twitter is focusing on Twitter. I think that it's pretty clear to us that Twitter isn't necessarily leftist, but Twitter does have is pretty left leaning. So they are willing to ban conservatives. It's just that someone with like the profile of Trump, at the end of the day, the Twitter executives and the Twitter leadership has to report back to their investors. Now, if they ban Donald Trump, that would be really bad for their business. So they're not going to do it because it's a bad business decision.
Great answer.
Unless he really starts saying some crazy stuff on Twitter.
Crazy shit.
Like real crazy. I mean,
really, like I'm talking. Yeah, like we're killing people right now.
Like here's the nuclear launch codes. Here's a dick. Like if he's doing that stuff, he'll probably get
launch code. He's like 8732. That's the football. I'm out. All right. So the next question comes from a server owner, Ace, and his question is: Um, Antifa often uses violence and assault towards its opposition in order to shut down their right to have political demonstrations. Why do you think that is just? And before you answer, um, Ace, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
So Ace is a server owner, so he will obviously be the same way I am. You heard the question. I'm gonna let you answer it, but I am gonna let Ace rebuttal. So Antifa, go ahead.
So when we focus on a lot of these groups, or I guess when we focus on events that we're attempting to disrupt, the question we would sort of pose, I guess, as a rebuttal to that question, is why would anyone want Nazis or KKK or any of those people to be able to publicly assemble? Like, it just doesn't seem to us. It just doesn't make sense to allow that sort of thing to happen. So all
Well,
they're doing is spreading hate, and go ahead.
so I mean, the flaw in that question is not everyone who is in these protests, or not even protests, at these public events, like even just like a Trump rally, not everyone's a Nazi, not everyone's a fascist, and I'm sure you know that. So I mean,
There's obviously some crossover politically, but
so where
but
okay,
like,
so
just
the
going
question
to the
is,
event is sort of an endorsement.
the question is, where is the moral justification of these people? Even like, let me just give you a little personal background. I absolutely believe in the Constitution. I absolutely believe in freedom. And even if a person holds a political position that I don't support, if they are by the bounds of law, obeying the law, protesting or having a public demonstration that is abiding the law, I support their ability to do that, even if it's something I totally disagree with. I'm not going to go out and beat the crap out of them or throw stuff at them because I disagree with it. But again, if it's not in the bounds of the law, then yeah, I would have a problem with it. I think the law should enforce and correct that. But this is not the case. So why does Antifa think they have the moral justification to do this, even though they're abiding the law in these demonstrations? So you tell me, what's the moral justification?
Okay. So we think that the law in that case is sort of not in line with morality. So these people that are going to these events, whether or not they're Nazis or fascists or whatever, it's just going to these events is an endorsement of. Well, I think just going to these events is an endorsement of sort of Trump's racist policies and that sort of thing. So we think that just going to these events is an endorsement of those policies, and that the law has not sort of caught up with modern times to deal with hate speech like Trump and his supporters spew.
Regardless, even if you truly believe a Trump supporter, even if they're just a person who holds conservative views but don't support or embrace his rhetoric or some of his comments, you're gonna put him, a label on him that he's a Nazi just because he supports Trump over Hillary. I mean, like that's my case. I wasn't totally sold on Trump, but I would definitely choose Trump over Hillary. And you're telling me because of that, you have the right to attack me because I supported Trump for that reason. So where's the moral justification where you can step on my rights and attack me even though I'm in the bound of the law?
Well, what we're saying is that the law is not in line with the morality of it, and so sort of people just going and voting for Trump or Hillary, what it comes down to at the end of the day is, voting for someone like Sanders or whoever, just voting for a third party is sort of a fruitless vote because it's not going to get you anywhere. Even if someone gets one person in electoral college, the one isn't going to do anything. At the end of the day, it just comes down to who gets more votes in electoral college. So, but we just think that I guess, like, it's just that Trump's ideas are so horrible that as much as we don't like Hillary, and a lot of us didn't vote for Hillary, keep in mind, most of us voted for Sanders. We just can't imagine how anyone who doesn't support racism or all these sorts of, or bigotry, or just sort of all the things that Trump stands for, how they can support Trump. We do understand that there is crossover in the middle of the country. So there's people who just sort of felt screwed by the Democratic Party, Obama and the Clintons, and just the elites in general. And they just kind of said, fuck it, vote for Trump. We think that Michael Moore has a pretty decent video where he talks about sort of people throwing a grenade into the system. And there probably is a lot of people who voted for him because of that. And maybe those people aren't necessarily racist, but there's a difference between going to one of these rallies where he goes and says these horrible things and just showing up to the voting booth and voting. There's a world of difference.
I mean, at the end of the day, I
All
think
right. So what we're gonna do here is we are going to take a Antifa. First off, amazing answers. I think you've kind of helped our users connect more with where Antifa stands, and maybe on certain points that we thought they were all alt left, maybe give us a little better feeling that, like, hey, we're not trying to like rip the government apart, right? So thank you for that, guys. We're gonna take a 10 to 15-minute break so Antifa can get some water, whatever. And we're going to reopen this back up. Everyone can stay here, just mute. We were going to reopen in 10 to 15 minutes. Antifa, does that work for you?
Yeah, that works for me.
All right, great. So guys, 10, 15 minutes. We're going to reopen it up to the rest of the questions. There's hundreds of questions pouring in. So we're going to try to get to them all. And thank you, Antifa. Let's take a 10 to 15-minute break. Are you there, Antifa?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. So the next question is, do you think Donald Trump could ever get towards a Hitler-like state where Antifa is arrested and people that oppose him?
I mean, I think that it's already moving that way. So today there had been some comments about, I guess, like almost a regulation of media, or at least the anti-Trump media. I could definitely see it happening, and that's part of the reason. Like, so that sort of idea is part of the reason why Anchorage Antifa does support gun ownership.
So I'm not going to jump into that one because that one's kind of the gun one. I want to go user questions before I jump into that one because that one's a spicy one. This comes from Doobie. As a Hispanic who voted for Bernie and generally supports his agenda, but also voted for Trump in the general, how do you justify lumping me in the Nazi types and attacking me for nonviolent political beliefs?
I mean, so sort of like just kind of standing idly by while a lot of this is in a way violence, because you're just sort of standing, it's sort of like the bully on the playground watching someone be bullied is just as guilty as the bully themselves. Just standing idly by while this stuff happens is not not really acceptable.
Sorry. I actually just asked you
No
another question and I didn't realize I was muted.
Okay.
Solomon's next question is, what are your thoughts on the Scalise shooting? That was the basketball court.
Yeah, the baseball field.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so we think that so the reason why that shooter, because obviously they're never gonna really because the media isn't really very good at their jobs. So we think that the motive behind that was probably had to do with healthcare, because that happened right around the healthcare time. So he probably went and did what he did because at the time Republicans were acting as if they were going to take everyone's healthcare away, and just doing that would be effectively killing people. So we think that it was a response to the Republicans' violence of trying to take people's healthcare away, which would cause a lot of death in and of itself.
Good answer. The next question comes from Shoplift Bread. It's an interesting question. What do you think about Austria banning the burqa?
Well, it just seems pretty obvious that Eastern Europe in general is moving more towards sort of fascist ideology. It's wrong to ban something like a burqa, or like what we saw with France banning the burkini or whatever it was on the beaches. It's obviously bad, and we're not surprised that Eastern Europe is moving more towards its fascist tendency.
All right. Thank you. The next question comes from Razin, and the question is, why is it that you claim to be liberating the working class while at the same time burning the property of said working class?
I mean, a lot of the times, or when Antifa protests, usually we're going after. I mean, with Berkeley, the example would be there was like a Starbucks that was burned, and some like there was a generator on one of the portable lights that was burned. So I wouldn't necessarily classify small business owners, or I mean, well, Starbucks isn't really small business, but corporations in that sense, as part of the working class. And it's pretty obvious that Starbucks wasn't going to just shut the doors after that. They were going to reopen, so it expended some of Starbucks' money, and people were still employed. Yeah, I mean that's. But so I guess I wouldn't say that we target the working class, at least not their property.
Fair enough. So this next question is from Spooky Devin's Ghost, and I'm going to add a little bit to it because it's about Las Vegas, and we had an AMA just on Monday, less than 24 hours. We got an actual survivor of that to be here, and Spooky's question is, what would Antifa think about the Vegas shooting, and what would they do to respond? And I also want to add in there, our speaker that responded to this and came on to talk about this less than 24 hours after getting shot at, sitting at an actual concert, the Jason Aldean concert, was there, talked about watching people get shot in the face and getting half of their face blown off. They do not want more gun control. So I would like for you to answer Spooky's question, which is, how does Antifa respond to Las Vegas? And secondly, how do you feel about someone who believes in guns getting shot at, watching someone's face get shot off, not wanting more regulation on guns?
I mean, so obviously, as I had said before, where we are from, in my chapter at least, supports gun ownership with regulation. We do believe there needs to be regulation on it, and we support it primarily because, and I think we part from the left on this, and we feel like the left is almost being hypocrites on this. That so if Trump ever really goes fascist, like really goes full on, he's going to put people in camps, lock Antifa up, lock any resistance up, which is the direction we think that he's going to be going at some point. If we remove everyone's guns, there's going to be no one to fight back against that. There's going to be no way to resist that. So we sort of subscribe to the idea that the founders had, which was that the ownership of guns exists to defend against a tyrannical government. And as for the Vegas, I guess the survivor and how we feel about them happen, they might feel that way because they feel that they almost have more of a reason to need a gun to defend themselves. They might feel, as I think many right-wingers feel, that just regulating guns isn't the solution to the problem. And we actually feel the same way. We feel that any sort of regulation on guns is rendered moot because no matter, obviously there's been a war on drugs in this country, and I'm pretty sure there's an opioid crisis. So if there's a war on drugs and that hasn't solved the problem, why would a war on guns solve the problem? It just doesn't seem like it would work. And we generally think that the left argues dishonest firearm ownership, and that because they argue dishonestly, they're never going to get anything done on it, because when they argue dishonestly, actual gun owners And people like us who, at our chapter, we do have a lot of knowledge about gun ownership. A lot of the arguments that the left makes are just wholly dishonest and uninformed. And in doing that, they actually are completely unsuccessful in making any arguments, because gun people hear what they have to say, and all they hear is lies, lies, lies. And even if they say some things that are true, it gets lost in all the lies, and no one wants to listen to what they have to say. So in terms of Vegas shooting, we actually do think bump stocks should be illegal. Automatic weapons are illegal at the moment. Bump stock is essentially a way to circumvent that law. So we think that as a circumvention of the law, bump stocks should be made illegal. And I think that the Republican Party will probably try to move in that direction because they did receive the green light from the NRA, and because they have the green light from the NRA, they will move in that direction.
So I want to rebuttal you on that. Is that your guys' way to jump on the train because you're absolutely failing, and this is your last chance to at least get the bump stock?
I mean, the reason why we think that the bump stock needs to go is because since automatic weapons are already illegal, all a bump stock is a circumvention of that law. It's sort of like a gray area.
Would you agree that this is not, that you feel like since the NRA came out and Republicans support it, you're essentially jumping on that bandwagon because you guys have been against quite a few things with guns and you haven't gotten any of them through?
I guess you could say that it is a victory that can, but we also just think that because we do part ways with a lot of like a lot of the left, and that we do support a lot of gun rights.
So if Antifa is so alt-left, why are they willing to support something as bump stock and not stand out and say, that's wrong, we need more than this, we need to actually stand up to the guns? Or is this Antifa essentially admitting we're failing, so we might as well get the small victory before we die?
Well, I would say that my chapter is definitely separated from the rest of Antifa. Most of Antifa would not agree with our position on guns. I would say they definitely don't agree with our position on guns. And when we do have discussions with them, we do regularly point out that if they ever want to make any progress, they have to actually learn how to argue, or at least present arguments that are honest about guns. Or else they're never going to get anywhere.
I just want to say you're awesome. You have awesome answers and stuff. So I'm going to jump in and just say thank you because you have great answers. How much, I guess, disparity is there between Antifa leaders of certain chapters?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a general, like the general ideas that we have about the economy and all that, but there definitely is a lot of disagreement on very specific policy points. And I mean, guns right here is a great point where you could say there is a lot of disagreement. So like our chapter definitely separates itself from the rest of Antifa with our opinions on guns. But it's definitely a very segmented movement. There's not necessarily a Antifa command. It's just sort of separated, and there is always some back and forth. There is some discussion. There is some debate on the back end of Antifa, and there are definitely parts of Antifa that, like, for example, my organization doesn't talk with. Because we have just some disagreements, and we know that we're better off just not discussing. Obviously we'll stand together against Trump and against the Republicans and all that, but we're not going to affiliate ourselves beyond the point of just cordial communication. So there definitely is a lot of divide among Antifa. We're not one united organization. But there are times like November 4th where we will all come together for the greater good and take action.
All right, thank you. The next question comes from Machine Code 00. He is a Centurion, an active user on the server, and a valued user on the server. The question is, do you condone the attack on media reporters at your protest, or do you want the media there?
Oh, so we have had some like small media come to some of our events. We haven't had a problem with the media. I guess if the media is attempting in any way to impede on the event, we don't have a problem with sort of using some muscle and getting them out of the way. but we haven't experienced any of that. Although we sort of assume that when chapters do take part in any sort of violence against media, or do I guess move them away or whatever they do, that the chapters are most likely acting in their own best interest and trying to get the media away if they're going to somehow be in the way of the event, or if they're just impeding progress, or if they might be in danger. I mean, being in the crowd with Antifa is a dangerous place to be, because a lot of times there's rocks being thrown between the groups, and really it's just better for the safety of the media in general for people to move. It's for people to move out of the way. And on top of that, a lot of us want to protect our identity. So if there's some media guy running around taking pictures of people, we don't have a problem with smashing their phone and trying to destroy their ability to take pictures of us.
So do you
We
do
make that
that
pretty clear
through
to media.
physical force?
We haven't had to do it, but I think it's pretty obvious that in other chapters, physical.
So some Australians have mentioned that American Antifa is the weakest Antifa there is. They don't understand protest tactics and similar stuff. Do you agree or disagree?
that the American Antifa is like not
Yeah, like in
as
other words,
organized.
how you form, how you do stuff at protests, so on and so forth.
Oh yeah.
In other words,
Well, yeah, I mean it's pretty
The
obvious.
Australia Antifa has mentioned that the American Antifa really doesn't understand how to get together, how to get stuff done, so on and so forth. Instead, there's just a bunch of random fucks that are meeting up at one point, and that is quote unquote what one person said.
I mean, I think that because I had mentioned this before, that a lot of the Antifa in Europe, and I mean, I think Australia is in a way an extension of that these countries have had Antifa movements around a lot longer, and because of that, these organizations are much more established, and they actually have a lot of their own, a lot of like, I guess they have learned a lot of experience as being more organized. And I think you can actually see that here with right-wing groups. So right-wing groups in America have been around a lot longer, like radical right-wing groups, and you can see a lot more organization among them than there is in Antifa. And there definitely are times when it seems Antifa could be more successful if there was more organization. The problem is that I think Antifa has been given such a negative light that in certain places, once the call goes out that Antifa is going to meet, that a lot of right-wingers and even people who might just call themselves liberals line themselves up with the right-wingers and actually come out to fight against Antifa. I think we've seen that a few times with Berkeley, where there was an occasion where Antifa was just sort of thrust out of where they were. I mean, Antifa has been pretty successful in Berkeley, but there have been obviously some failings. And I think that maybe better training on just some basic crowd control tactics would help. And just generally more organization when we're out in the field would be better. But like I said, my chapter hasn't had to deal with any of that. Obviously, it's different for my chapter to make that observation, and then if my chapter actually went and got involved in the stuff, it's a different situation. But I think that Antifa could definitely move more towards some maybe basic training to sort of help that stuff.
Great answer. Totally agree. So Solomon asked a question. Solomon is one of my personal favorite users. He probably knows that because I spoil him a little bit. Solomon, and I think he asked a great question here about your cell phones and throwing them on the ground, so on and so forth. Why do you expect privacy in a public space?
I mean, I guess it's something where you can't make an expectation of privacy in a public space, but because we have to worry about our identities being like leaked or us being doxxed, we sort of have to take efforts to promote privacy. So I guess it's reasonable to say, you can't really expect privacy in a public, but we have to make efforts to promote privacy because of the way that the right, and I mean specifically Poll on 4chan is pretty good at doxing people, and there have been a lot of Antifa members doxed.
Good point. So let me see here, and hold on one sec. And the next question comes from Chancellor, And Chancellor's question is, could it not be said to be ethically the same as victim blaming to put the blame for the violence of the baseball court shooter on the politicians who were almost killed? Do the lives of their relatively innocent family not bother you?
Um, so I guess that's something that you take into consideration. But these politicians that were voting against healthcare were essentially signing other people's death warrants. And I mean, we don't necessarily know, but maybe that shooter had family members who were going to be affected by the removal of Obamacare, and who would actually see health loss of healthcare that could result in death. Um, I guess you could say it's victim blaming, but with the Nazis that were killed in World War II, was to say that they brought that upon themselves. Is that victim blaming? I mean, I don't think so.
All right, great. So the next question comes from a user, Waifu, and also known as Ken. And the question is, does Antifa confront the science of race or political philosophy of the far right in an intellectual way anywhere, or does Antifa rely exclusively on physical disruption and violence?
I guess so. My chapter takes part in a lot of online activism, and that isn't necessarily violence. I would consider online action, online activism, in a way to be sort of an intellectual pursuit, because just that is really just such an important part of activism now. That if you don't have an online presence, you just really aren't going to be able to survive. But I would say that most chapters do actually take part in some sort of physical action, and that we find that to be the most effective way to go about it.
Good answer. Thank you. The next question comes from Potato and user Potato. And the question is, what are your opinions on the state trooper that tried to stop medics from performing CPR on Heather Heyer that died from a heart attack right after getting hit by the car during the Unite the Right arc?
I would say that I would say that the paramedics were probably more experienced than the police officer in resuscitation, so he probably should have let them continue what they were doing. Were these paramedics from like the organizers, or were these actual paramedics?
They were actual paramedics.
Yes, I would say that the police officer should have let the paramedics do their job.
Agreed. The next question is, I'm going to broaden it a little bit. The original question is, are you allowed to carry pocket knives? And the question is, can you give us kind of you've obviously been to Antifa rallies across the United States and wherever, and what do you generally see when you try to get into these rallies? Are they, by the way, this is from Aoku, AOKU user, and I mean, what do you generally see? Are they asking like what you're carrying? Are they patting you down? Like, what are they doing when you try to enter these rallies? And do you wear face masks and try to cover up, or I mean, how do you normally do it?
I mean, just usually covering up with a hoodie, and but essentially you want to hide half of your face. Usually it's usually your eyes that are like the most. I guess like the dead, like your eyes and your nose. All that is kind of like the easiest thing to give you away. So wearing sunglasses.
Do you suggest your members real quick during your meetings that that's what they do?
Oh, we pretty much tell them that you need to hide your identity to a certain extent. I mean, because obviously when we go have our,
you give them tactics to hide themselves.
Yeah. So we promote the use of hoodies. Sunglasses are a good way to hide your eye color. Bandanas are a good way to hide sort of the shape of your chin and the lower part of your face. Obviously, you can't completely cover it unless you wear like a full face mask, and usually it's harder to get away with wearing a full face mask. We haven't had any issues, but I know that there are tactics being used by law enforcement now that makes Antifa and protesters in general remove their masks in an attempt to dissuade us, and that would actually be dissuade us from going there because we would be worried about our identities being exposed and our personal lives being gone after.
Great answer. So the next question is going to be, grab this one real quick. There's quite a bit, so I'm trying to keep up with them the best that I can here. All right, so the next question comes from Fume, and how do you respond to the video of Steven Crowder exposing Antifa for handing out weapons and planning? Hold on. I moved. Sorry, planning on luring right-wingers to their car in which they were loaded shotguns. There were loaded shotguns.
I mean, we actually haven't. So we are aware of that video. I haven't gotten around to watching it yet. So I guess I would have to actually before I commented on it too, because obviously I'd want to get an understanding of what exactly happened. Now, I personally would not have anyone in my chat do that, only because if you do that, I mean, the people that did that are most likely they're going to go to jail. I mean, the FBI is going to arrest them. They're going to jail, and you can hide your identity all you want, but if the FBI or any government organization really wants to know your identity, which I'm imagining Steven Crowder did have video of these people organizing, I mean, those people are going to go to jail. Then that whatever chapter that chapter is done. The chapter is not going anywhere anymore. So I wouldn't have any of my members do something like that, only because it's sort of like a, just scaring two right wingers isn't gonna that's not gonna get you anywhere. Right. It's just it's a waste of time, and you're gonna go to jail.
Point. Yeah, and I want everybody to take in what he's saying here because, I mean, what he's saying, these chapters are run in different areas, and they're not all ran the same. And I think you can hear he has some obvious common sense the way that he runs his chapter. So my question would be from Solomon, actually. Could you vote that chapter out or no?
I mean, there's not really a formal voting process. So no, I mean, essentially, there's no way to sort of vote a chapter. Yeah, no, there's no way to vote a chapter. It's not really how it's structured. It's not structured like in that sort of formal sense. There might be, there might be parts of Antifa, so groups that sort of work together. Maybe you could say we're not going to affiliate ourselves, but I would say that generally speaking, there's really no way to just vote a chapter out.
The next question comes from Help Me, and it's a good question. Does Antifa support pro-refugee policies in America or across the world?
Yeah, we support essentially just taking in refugees. It's just if they're in some sort of situation, country, we support taking them in. We support a reasonable level of background checks, but the sort of things that Trump has imposed are sort of these racist bans, essentially saying that no Muslims can come in from these countries, while still saying that they can accept Christians, just seems to us to be sort of ridiculous. I mean, I don't think the policy says that, but I think it's pretty clear that if there was a group of Christians that were looking to come to the United States, I doubt the Trump administration would stop that from happening, even if they were from these countries that there was a refugee ban on. So we support we support refugees coming into the United States.
So a user is claiming you're a fake and that Antifa doesn't have chapters, and that overall everything you are saying, you are fake. You aren't that. You aren't Antifa. And there's no such thing as an Antifa chapter. they're a communist. And
I mean,
can you,
I don't.
can you support that?
I would say no. I don't know what name they want us to use. We call them chapters. I'm not really sure. We're saying that we call them chapters. That means that we're fake. I would just say that they're probably a troll.
I would
We
have to
see this
agree.
stuff pretty regularly on them.
I would have to agree. I told them the same exact thing. But I wanted to be clear that they are called chapters, and that's how Antifa goes about it. So, sorry, I'm just looking for the next question here. I'm not going to ask that one. Really, Raz? Noah's question, based on the historical record of tried communism, violence, death, low standards of living, what would your reaction be to an anti-communist group?
I mean, I guess it depends on where they align. Or are they just kind of like misguided and they're missing, or are they anti-communists and they're like extreme right wingers? Because I think that there probably is.
I mean, like Steve Jobs is a lefty, right? Well, was.
Yeah.
He's dead as fuck now. He was a lefty, but he believed in entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
So let's use Steve Jobs as an example. Do you think there's an anti-communist group that is still on the left that could shut down Antifa that are similar to the people of what Steve Jobs believed in? And that is
anti-communist. Oh, yeah, I mean, I think definitely. I think that definitely that there are elements of the left that are sort of taking aim at further left movements, and they want them eliminated. I think the same thing, right? It's just not nearly. It's just not. They're just not effective. So we generally would not. We would say Steve Jobs was, he may have given some lip service to leftist causes, and he may have also given some material support. But it seems pretty obvious that with the sort of sweatshops that there were overseas, and just generally the sort of profits that company was making, that he may have been left in some of the things he said, but it doesn't mean that he really was on the left. He was really just a capitalist.
All right, great. This is an interesting question. And I really like it. And it comes from a user who's somewhat of a regular and also generally a troll, in my opinion. But it's not a trolly question. So they kind of like got bumped up a little bit because it finally didn't ask a trolly question. Do you think artificial intelligence should be given rights? What are your thoughts on artificial intelligence being used to create artificial workers or sex bots, girlfriends, worker, whatever you want to call it, whatever their job is? What is your whole take on AI?
Well, I guess for like the rights thing, it would sort of be a case by case basis. Like, is it actually intelligence, or is it the appearance of intelligence? And then, like, as for artificial workers and that sort of thing, I think that once you get to artificial, you have to start talking about a universal basic income, because there's just not going to be enough jobs. Just the machines are essentially going to take over the workforce, at least. So you're going to need to provide a basic income for people, and that will most likely come. You'd have to have that come out of the companies that are making all these products and benefiting from the money being in the market. So you'd have to essentially use your taxes to give people a check every month, in a way. Which I guess there's already systems in place for that, but you would just have to expand it to essentially cover everyone, except for I'm sure there will be some jobs, but I imagine they're not going to be many.
So, are you saying that the outcome of AI may be a bad thing?
I mean, I guess we'd have to cross that bridge when we get there, because I think that there's a lot of different saying a lot of different things on that topic, so we'd have to cross that bridge when we get there. But we don't necessarily view the universal basic income as being a bad thing. It would just be something that would need to happen at that point.
All right, great. So the next question here, and you can go here, and sorry, sometimes it moves around. What do you think about Republicans like Rick Wilson, who will be doing an AMA here Monday? Are you familiar with him?
I'd have to think.
So Rick Wilson
so.
is a Republican. He's been on Jake Tapper, Fox News, so on and so forth, who are taking an extreme anti-Trump stance. Do you support them and other never Trumpers? So in other words, Rick Wilson, okay, is generally a right-wing person, but he is anti-Trump. He'll be on here Monday doing a AMA similar to yours, exactly similar to yours. Yet he's taking a different stance on Trump, and he's one of the few that hasn't just been like circle jerk. I agree. What's your take on them? And that this is from Jump Into the Sky, user Jump Into the Sky.
Okay. I mean, I guess like, so if there's Republicans that are going against Trump, we're obviously in favor of that. But we are generally pretty cautious because we feel like a lot of these Republicans that are anti-Trump are just doing it because it's sort of the fashionable thing to do. If you're like an establishment member, and we think that they would be just as, so they would be acting in a similar way if, let's say, like a socialist like Bernie Sanders was elected. So, I guess it's fine that they're going to go against Trump, but it's something where we wouldn't want to make allies with them because we know that they're going to stab us in the back later. And also, we're worried that some of these people might be involved in some sort of back-end shady business that would be going after Antifa.
Okay, great. Hold on one second. All right. Sorry. And right. Do you relate to Trump just in the sense that he is anti-establishment? This is from Solomon.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that he's anti-establishment. But he's anti-establishment in the sense that he's further to the right than the Republican Party is, generally speaking. Although, because of the amount of money he's made, and I mean, he's obviously been involved in politics a long time, in the sense that he's always been paying people off. And he even admits that. He says, I paid the Democrats off in my state because those were the people who were in charge, trying to get things done. So we understand that part of his support came from the fact that he sort of represented himself as an anti-establishment candidate, but we are very doubtful that he actually is an anti-establishment candidate. That, so like he was eventually, with the healthcare, he was saying he'd sign whatever Republicans put on his desk. So, is that really anti-establishment? I don't think so.
Hold on. Solomon, are you here? Solomon, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Did you want to rebuttal that?
I do think there is a case to be made that he's anti-establishment. Maybe we could say the establishment is Wall Street. Now I know that he's brought in some key figures from Solomon or Goldman Sachs, and Carl Icahn is obviously huge. But I do think that there's, when Silicon Valley, every CEO of, the big Facebook, Google, I mean, these guys were clearly anti-Trump, and they do represent some sort of an establishment in the corporate world. So I think
Right.
you're
And,
a
you know,
little weak to say he's not anti-establishment in maybe a greater scale.
well, I think that the establishment is like sort of, so there's not just one the establishment. There's the establishment in a general way of speaking, in the sense that, like let's say Stephen Colbert and uh, a Republican politician are in part of the establishment in the same way, in the sense that they wield a lot of power. And just wielding a lot of power does sort of make you part of the establishment to a certain extent. But then taking it a step further, he's sort of willing to say, or Trump is willing to say, I will sign whatever Republicans put on my desk. And to do that is to sort of just be establishment, because most of the people in power in the Republican Party are establishment politicians.
What do you think about him
that,
signing an executive order that says congressmen can no longer lobby after they retire for 5 years, and you put a lifetime ban on lobbying for a foreign country? Now, someone lobbying for a foreign country would be the example of the prior Speaker of House. So, he left, and now he's got a nice gig, and that's no issue. That's the establishment I'm talking about. Is Trump pro-lobby or going against the lobby of Washington?
well, I mean, I think he might sign that executive order, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to affect anything. I mean, I'd imagine they finding their own ways to have lobbying occur. I mean, because he obviously is someone who has taken part in
But you
lobbying
agree he took a
on his
shot.
own.
I mean, he may not solve the issue, but he took a shot at that issue. You
Yeah, I
agree
guess it would
with
be
that?
fair to say he took a shot at it, but I'd imagine that he probably knows of other ways to circumvent it, and essentially he might just be paying lip service more than anything else.
No, and I think I want to finish with this and get back to the AMA. It's really interesting. But I just think that you and I could agree a common ground is if Trump ends up being anti-establishment, which your jury is still out, but if he is, that is one way that Antifa is going to relate to his cause, correct?
Yeah, but I would say being anti-establishment on the right and on the left are two different things.
I'm saying they're one thing. But the time will tell.
I think we.
Yeah, I think we exhausted that. Both of you great answers. Thank you, Solomon, as always. So the next question comes from Infidel, and it is: you stated that one of Antifa's greatest successes to date was the blocking of conservative speakers at speaking engagements. Can you explain what could be considered paradoxical at best and hypocritical at worst, the rationale that supports denying one person's freedom of speech while demanding the same for yourself? So, in other words, you stopped someone's freedom of speech, yet demand it for yourself.
Well, we don't think that the freedom of speech covers the sort of hateful rhetoric that you see from people like Ben Shapiro, who are essentially calling trans people and saying that they have mental illnesses. We think that that sort of behavior is going to lead to violence, and that those words in and of themselves are violence.
So, one would argue that you agree with freedom of speech when it agrees with you, because there have been many court cases, multiple, that have gone to the Supreme Court for hate speech, and every single one has been turned down. And hate speech is considered freedom of speech. So, in speaking for the Supreme Court, they would argue, if they were here right now, potentially, that if we're going to support you and your freedom of speech, why should we not support everyone else?
Well, I mean, I think that there's people I understand like what you're saying. I think that we think that the way that the United States treats freedom of speech is flawed, so that there is room to define certain sectors of speech that could lead to violence. I mean, and there is, obviously, you can't call for direct action of violence. That's illegal. That's actually not considered free speech. But we think that that sort of sanction against that sort of speech needs to be extended to people like Ben Shapiro, who go out and essentially call trans people saying they have a mental illness. It's like almost dehumanizing them, and we think that that can lead to violence against them. And in that way, he is supporting violence, and it should be legal to support violence against people.
All right. Infidel, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Infidel is a common user here. He's respectful. He won't attack you. He's not someone that just comes in and spams bullshit. He has an open mic. Infidel, I'm gonna let you rebuttal that question.
I just want to very quickly try to make sure that we draw a distinction here between hate speech and speech that is a call to violence. Hate speech has time and time again has been upheld by the Supreme Court as protected speech. Now, a call to violence, it's to one thing to say, I hate those, whatever. That's perfectly free and legal speech. That's protected speech. But then another thing to say, let's go and kill those, whoever the other, that is where the line is drawn. By Ben Shapiro saying that transsexuals have a mental illness, he is not calling, that is not a call to violence. That is not a call to action, at least not physical action, maybe political action, which is allowable and it's legal, and it should continue to be protected.
I think that we disagree on, I guess, where line lies. So we think that doing that, sort of saying those sort of things will actually lead to action, because you're sort of otherizing people from the LGBT community. So you're sort of saying, these people are different, they have a mental illness, and by doing that, there's other people who are thinking, well, then we have to go deal with them, and so sort of his speech is going to lead to violence against these people.
I guess that's where you and I kind of see things differently from, I guess, strictly a constitutional standpoint. I believe that we should operate within the frame of the Constitution, not try to work outside of basic laws and basic principles of liberty and free speech in order to change our government. You expect one thing while trying to suppress another of the same, and that is that's a logical fallacy.
I guess I see what you're saying, but I just think that we're disagreeing on where the line can be drawn for a call to action.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry, I got disconnected. Obviously, I've been talking for like 5 minutes, but I do this shit all the time. Obviously, we want you to join downstairs. Everybody will be dropped after this. I'm going to ask you about 2 more questions, but we would love for you to stick around, because I know people are going to want to ask you some more questions. That's totally up to you. You've been answering a ton of them. If you want to stay around, great. We totally appreciate it. I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. And if you want to drop down, everybody will be dropped down into the channel. And you can talk with the actual users in an open forum. Versus just asking questions, obviously. So, AMA setup. Kirby Games' question is second to last question. Do you think Antifa is a loud minority or a quiet majority?
I think that so Antifa as an organization is definitely a loud minority, but I think that our ideas are part of the quiet majority's ideas.
All right, great. So this is the last question of the AMA. I first off want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for coming here, answering my messages, to get in contact with you, to get you here. Your outlook, I really think, helps our users understand that maybe Antifa isn't necessarily one chapter. There's a lot of chapters, a lot of leaders, a lot of people that maybe agree with the core of Antifa. But when you get down to stuff like guns and things like that, there are some differences across Antifa. I think you all stand for the same thing. That's obvious, right? Seems like you have a very clear head. You're clear-minded. and you're an American Antifa. So it seems as though you somewhat are willing to put America first, but maybe your view on it is a little bit different than some people. So my last question is, you're an American. You support America becoming the best country there is. You watched the Las Vegas shootings. You were as heartbroken as the rest of us. You watched 9/11. You were as heartbroken as the rest of us. You watched the Oklahoma City bombing. You were as heartbroken as the rest of us. Every attack, Orlando, whatever it may be, you're Antifa, but your heart hurts as much as the rest of us. So my question is, how do you feel Antifa really is bringing America together instead of farther apart?
Well, I think that we're working. Obviously, there's going to be some people that we're never going to be able to reach, and I think a lot of those people exist on the far right. But I think that we are working to sort of promote a positive message around socialism and sort of like educating people more about positive aspects rather than the negative aspects that the establishments on both sides try to promote. I think that Bernie Sanders sort of receiving the sort of widespread support that he had sort of shows that there is a chance that Antifa and socialist movements in general, like you could look at the Democratic Socialists of America, elements of the left that are trying to move to more progressive stances. So all these groups are sort of trying to move America in the direction of saying, okay, we should start taking care of our people more. The Republicans and conservatives are sort of standing in the way of that. They're sort of saying, no, I've got mine, now get yours. I think that Antifa is moving in the direction of sort of getting the socialism message out and getting the message out for healthcare and helping refugees and helping migrants and just helping people in general. And also getting the message out that we can't just stand idly by and let this sort of stuff happen. We can't just stand idly by and let Nazis rally around some dumb monument. We just can't stand idly by and let people spew hatred on campuses. That we have to organize, we have to get together, and we have to, knock on doors and put flyers out. We have to just work at it. And if we work at it, we can achieve, we can achieve sort of like a better world for all Americans. Not just the rich Americans, not just the 1%, not just the elite. We can actually get a better country for the hardworking people, for the people in the middle of the country who've been lied to by politicians nonstop. For the people in the South who've been lied to about from politicians, we can get help for everyone in the country. We can get healthcare. We can get get things for people that politicians are willing to do because they're in the pockets of the special interests. So I think that through what we're doing is we're promoting a positive message of socialism, and we're trying to promote a government that actually cares about its people and not about the big corporations or special interests.
Great answer. I want to say thank you. If I had to pick one Antifa to be on my side based on the 30 plus questions you answered, and I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question, I'd pick you. I got to be honest. You're willing to talk to people. You're willing to meet people in the middle. And if someone's going to not stand for something because there is Black Lives Matters, there's communists, there's whatever, the Supreme Court has already decided freedom of speech is a thing. But there's a difference between freedom of speech and common sense, right? You have a common sense approach to being Antifa. And I think when they talked about the shotguns being in the cars and your reply to that it was disgusting and that you didn't want that and it didn't prove anything, I think your movement that you're shooting for is going to go a lot farther than some of the other ones. So yeah. I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for your time. Your time is valuable. You did not have to come here and speak to our users. So I know they all appreciate it. And thank you so much for coming. And if you have any extra time, we're going to drop you down into the other channel with everyone else. If you got to run, I get it. I'm sure everybody would love to talk to you in an open chat if you have the time. If not, on behalf of all of the politics server, thank you so much for coming here and answering our users' questions, and great job.
I'd just like to thank you for having me, and thank everyone for coming. And I would just say that if you feel the need to act, obviously you can go on our website. That's been times and look. There's plenty of places you can find about Antifa. There is chapters all over the country. And go out and vote. Make sure you go out and vote. Yeah, that's all I got.
And guys, I'm gonna link the website here in Antifa AMA text. I just linked it. Feel free to check it out. And again, thank you, Antifa. Everybody in here, you're gonna be dropped down to political chat Antifa. If you care to join us, there'll be heavy moderation. Moderators will mute people, so on and so forth. We would love to have you there so users can talk to you. If not, I'll talk to you on the side. Thank you so much for your time.